Great. So welcome to this Cosmology of Light musing. And today our focus is on space-time energy gravity. And I'm really looking forward to an interesting conversation because space-time energy gravity are something that seems to be very disconnected from our normal purviews of thinking. But if you read some of the, first of all, I don't know everyone's background, and you may be, very deep in this area. But so I'd love to go around and just hear people introduce themselves, and then I'll just share the introductory readings that I had suggested for this, and I think that's how we will get launched. So before I go there, if we can just go around, and I think Michael dropped off, hopefully he can rejoin. But if we can go around and quickly introduce ourselves. Okay, yeah, he's back. And then we can get launched. So Margaret, perhaps,
Yep.
Would you mind going, please?
Sure. I'm Margaret Faines. I'm retired, but my background is in counseling and graphic design and teaching meditation. So pretty varied, focused mostly now on digital art, creating digital art. So like some of you, I may have kind of a large swath of categories, but I'm very interested in how this subject is being thought of in a new way, and sort of trying to bring a number of areas together that have, as Pravir has been saying, have not necessarily been thought of. So I'm developing some artwork to go along with some of these thoughts. And so I don't miss these opportunities to learn a little more.
Yeah, and I'll mention that Margaret and I collaborating on a book on musings of light. And so I'm very excited about bringing that out. And there's been some really, really inspirational artwork that she's done, and I think we're halfway through, so it's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah.
Halfway through.
Yeah. Great. Mike, you want to briefly introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm super excited that I'm stationary, and I'm happy to be able to hear you as well. I would say that I'm a technologist, in that I really have been fascinated with the way that technology and human systems engage with one another. That's probably because I read too many encyclopedias when I was a kid and spent too much time in the library. But I'm also fascinated with music and magic, and Pravir knows this stuff as well, and kind of the magic of magic. Why is magic magical? I ended up getting into fractals while I was studying geology and geophysics, and didn't go in the grad direction of research I wanted to, but ended up in the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and spent about 4 years there, and then started a technology transformation consulting firm, and have been lucky enough to find Pravir's paper on fractal dynamics in the journal back in the day, and just kind of reached out to him and said, I love this. I've been trying to figure out how to take these things and apply them, not to necessarily find a deep ore deposits, but to engineering futures and thinking about collective intelligence and knowledge flows and learning loops in organizations, and using it as a source of vibrancy. And so I've been on that journey with them.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. It's Michael and I think it's been like at least 10 years since we began to just have some amazing discussions on a range of topics, and fractals has been kind of the common thread through a lot of them. And Michael's done some really, I think, practical work in the area, and he's, as he said, he's started a couple of companies that have used that kind of thinking, which has been amazing. And he has a TEDx talk on magic as well, so he's pretty deep in that area. So that's a very interesting background.
So Michael, you said source of vibrancy. I mean, I haven't heard that phrase. It's just a wonderful sort of way to look at things, a source of vibrancy, kind of as a way of calling your attention. Does something have a source of vibrancy?
Yeah. Is it bringing you energy, or is it taking energy
Yeah,
from you?
I think that's a
And
key awareness.
and if you're surrounded by enough things that are giving you some energy, where's the vibrancy? Yeah,
Cool.
I would love to see a visualization of the source of vibrancy.
I'll think about that.
Yeah.
I will think about that. It's doable.
Yeah. And in the cosmology of light, light is to me kind of the source of vibrancy. And that's part of where we're going to go today. So I'm going to just share the initial suggested readings, and I'll give a quick cap, and then we can just dive into that in a little more detail. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you can see it now. But the focus of today's discussion was space-time energy gravity, and some of the recommended readings had to do with, of course, the mystery of space-time energy gravity, because when we think about cosmology of light, and I'll just mention some introductory comments, that essentially in this point of view, the idea is that, of course, we know scientifically that light can travel at, or is known to travel at 186,000 miles per second in vacuum. And that's a fundamental constant with which we kind of filter and perceive things. But in a cosmology of light, the root idea or the main idea is that what if we can conceptualize spaces where light is imagined to travel at different constant speeds simultaneously? So of course we have c, 186,000 miles per second, but then what if light can also travel infinitely fast, and that reality that's created due to light traveling infinitely fast is simultaneous with this reality that we experience viscerally at 186,000 miles per second. And then on the flip side, what if light could be projected at zero speed as well? And what kind of reality would that create? So there's several different scenarios, but these all intermingle and then influence how we actually experience the physical universe around us. So when we talk about the mystery of space-time energy and gravity, space-time energy gravity become a mechanism by which some of that infinite potential where light is traveling infinitely fast can be materialized in this realm where light is existing at 186,000 miles per second. And obviously, that's where we're going to go into more detail, but let me mention the other key readings here, which all give it helps us to triangulate on this subject of space-time energy gravity. So when we talk about unity to diversity, if we have light traveling infinitely fast, then by definition, it will be present everywhere at the same time. It's going to, in a sense, be all powerful, because if anything, not the nature of light arises, it will overcome it and become of the nature of light. Since everything is recorded in the substance of light, which exists everywhere simultaneously, there's a sense of knowledge that light has of everything happening in its space. And then since everything is connected in the fabric of light, there's this sense of harmony that exists as well. And when we think about that kind of realm, it's clear that there's a unity that defines it. And yet, when we experience practical life, there's infinite diversity. So the question is, how does that unity actually become this diversity? And that's what that blog post is about. And it's intimately related to the notion of space-time energy gravity. Then also we have the notion of quanta and the Big Bang, because quanta is, we can think about it as the mechanism by which some information and light traveling at a faster speed can gather itself materially to express the concept that it's trying to express at a slower speed of light. And so quanta from that point of view becomes a bridge mechanism. And if we think about Big Bang from that point of view, then essentially the Big Bang is a milestone event where you can say when light projected itself at 186,000 miles per second, all that information that became available took the form of all these particles simultaneously, and that's what created the Big Bang in a sense. And then we also look at the idea of materialization of light. How specifically would it work if you had these multiple layers so that infinite information existing at that speed where light's traveling infinitely fast can precipitate to this layer? So I proposed a mechanism for that, but bound up to that or intimate with that mechanism is the idea of the bounds of existence, which in that blog post really look at the play between the speed of light c and Planck's constant h, which scientifically there hasn't been said that these two are related, but in my perception, they're intimately related, and h, in fact, is a byproduct or emergence that arises when light travels at 186,000 miles per second, and that's something that I've written about. So it's I'm just framing, what the potential areas are that we can explore today. But I want to pause and if you read any of these, I just welcome your comments, and whichever direction you'd like to go, let's take it there. So let me pause there. I'm going to switch back to unsharing. So comments, reactions to the post?
So just a little explanation. So the Big Bang, light's projected, and there's the particles, particles are formed, and then between the formation of the particles and the materialization, is there another step there, or the particles come together through these quantum mechanisms?
Yeah, so let me go into that in a little more detail. The way that I see it is that, so if you have light, so in a cosmology of light, I'm assuming that the native state of light is where it travels infinitely fast. I mean, that's an assumption. So that's the foundation of this. And then the question is, what's the mechanism by which that light traveling infinitely fast precipitates or creates material reality by, essentially it's by traveling at a slower speed. So if it were to reduce its speed, then you can imagine that instead of being present everywhere, if we just try and grasp that idea intuitively, then it's going to take a finite amount of time to express itself. So if it's traveling slower, it's going to take X amount of time. And that notion of taking X amount of time is related to this concept of quanta, because now, since it's taking X amount of time, during that X amount of time, there's a buildup of energy or information, and that creates this idea of quanta. So in this scheme, there can be different levels of quanta, but we're certainly familiar with the quanta related to Planck's constant that shows up here in material reality. But there's a precipitating scheme, and if I step back without getting too complicated, but if we think about light traveling infinitely fast, then what I had suggested earlier was that there's 4 properties that animate that reality. Because light's present everywhere, we can think about this idea of presence, we can think about power, knowledge, harmony. And so the idea is that you've got those 4 properties or principles, and then when light projects itself slower, there's a differentiation that begins to occur so that knowledge becomes a diversified set of knowledge. So knowledge diversifies into a practically infinite number of properties all related to knowledge. Similarly, presence diversifies into a larger set. And so there's this differentiation that by which the stuff that's implicit in life becomes more explicit when light slows down. And then that further, when light slows down even further, then there's a further quantization or differentiation that occurs, and that creates these seed elements. And so these seed elements are like infinite number of unique seeds that then stand behind, in a sense, what is going to be materially expressed. And that, to me, this infinite number of seeds is the basis of what we can call space. So these seeds need an arena in which they can play, in a sense, and that is what space is. And if we think about time, time is really this concept where the idea that's inside a seed now matures, and the maturity, the rate of maturity is what time is. And so we're seeing it's intimately related to this, again, this concept of having unique seeds and the way that the unique seeds show what's inside them. But in the process of showing what's inside them, there's a conversion of fundamental energy from subtle to more concrete. And so you see this third aspect of the play of energy. And then you also realize materially that when you see the infinite diversity, yet there's an order to it. So there's a harmony that exists, so that there's a relationship between seed and seed, or between collectivities of seeds. And to me, that's what gravity is. So space-time, energy, gravity become a mechanism. So first of all, we can understand them by really seeing this precipitation, which creates unique seeds that house infinite diversity and information. And then space-time, energy, gravity are what we call these broad parameters that in fact are nothing other than a mechanism by which the richness and light can get precipitated. Anyway, let me just pause, and I'm not sure if I answered your question, Margaret, but.
Yes, and added to it, the last thing that you said, the space-time, energy, gravity are the parameters for the precipitation. I mean, that sort of stops you in your tracks for a moment. I mean, because we, when you think of those concepts, we think of them in vast ways or levels of ways. And you're saying that they're similar to quanta, a bridge. They're a bridge. Can we say they're another bridge mechanism?
Yes. So in fact,
oh
the way that I would perceive them is that you've got what I call as composite quantum, which has dimensions or parts of space-time, energy, gravity. So any quantum has to have these 4 dimensions to it. And so it's a whole that actually is what's responsible for materialization occurring, because anything that materializes has to have this code of the specific space-time, energy, gravity that animates it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a composite quantum. So when we think about quantum, I think that our current understanding of quantum, in my perception, is at the beginning stages. There's a lot more that needs to be done to kind of get it to a more mature level. And what I'm proposing with cosmology of light is a framework, in fact, by which to even think about quanta differently, and what's the architecture of any quantum particle when you think about it. So the question about Big Bang, which is where we kind of diverge from. So the Big Bang is that event that occurs when all this information that now is trying to express itself in space-time, energy, gravity, in that composite, it materializes due to the gathering of energy in this composite space-time, energy, gravity quantum. And that is what the Big Bang is, because it's now become from subtle to more material. And that creates this phenomena where there's a plethora of quantum objects that now show up.
Right.
And to me, that's a start of at least how we perceive the start of the cosmos. So
very helpful. That last piece, very helpful.
Yeah. All right. What else? What were some other things that kind of stood out? Or we can explore this further, go into quantum computation, whatever you'd like. So yeah.
I'm really fascinated by the unity and diversity stuff. I'd just love if you would talk about that more.
Sure, sure, absolutely. Yeah. So the idea is that if you have light traveling infinitely fast, then just very simply, if we try and grasp that intuitively, we know that if you've got a volume, no matter how large, and you got light at the center, and it's traveling infinitely fast, it's going to fill up that volume instantaneously. So light's going to express itself in that space at the same time. So there's a unity that exists, fundamentally a unity that's going to exist in that space because everything is connected, is one, and it's all at the same time. So space and time take on a whole different kind of unified sense. And so whatever, yet you've got, in a sense, like these properties of all presence, all power, all knowledge, all harmony, which means you've got all information. So implicit in that unity is an infinite richness of information. And that's, to me, that's what unity is. You've got this thing that's fundamentally connected that has all possibility embedded in it. Mm-hmm. And then diversity is the process by which that thing that is implicit becomes explicit. And it becomes explicit through the process of a series of quantizations. So, what do I mean when I say quantizations? It's essentially a quantization can be related to light moving from one speed to a lower speed, and that mechanism is a quantization because what's happening there is that you've got the implicitness in light becoming more explicit through a process by which there's a gathering by which the differentiation can be expressed. So that's the basis of diversity. And what I proposed, and this is purely from a mathematical point of view, because just stepping back, these musings that I've written are based on 10 books that I wrote on cosmology of light. And the cosmology of light, to me, was kind of like an artistic way to try and grasp what is it that animates the power in light. And so I use mathematics as a medium to try and express that. But mathematically, when you look at, okay, how can you make unity into diversity? There's three fundamental transformations that need to occur to allow that that unity to become diversity. And that's why I propose, just from a mathematical point of view, that you've got three different quantizations that relate to each of these transformations. And practically and physically, what's happening is that these quantizations occur when light occurs at or shows itself at a different speed. And that's physically the process by which the quantizations are precipitated. And that's a mechanism, in my opinion, of how this multiple levels of quantization occur. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's interesting when you think about the speed of light. I mean, if you look at any formula that exists in physical science, you can notice from the formula that there's already an inverse relationship between Planck's constant c and the speed of light. Planck's constant h and the speed of light c. I mean, one is an extremely small and the other is extremely large. They're both constants. They're not considered to be related, but in my opinion, they're intimately related because c is a byproduct. H is a byproduct of c. So if light travels infinitely fast, then there's no need for accumulating content, and so h is 0. When light is traveling at c, then automatically there's an accumulation of whatever's in light that takes place, and that's related to what we call h. And so these fundamental, the play between c and h is, I think, fundamental to seeing how materialization occurs or how diversity comes into being. So so that's some of the stuff that I've explored in detail in the books in the cosmology of light, but then I try to capture non-mathematically in just an intuitive way in some of these musings, just to try and convey a concept. So.
Mhm. No, that's helpful. Do you mind talking about the three different quantizations a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, there's multiple ways. We can use, so far in our discussion, we brought up a few different concepts. We've talked about one, there's a fourfoldness, there's four properties that are implicit in light. And one way to think about quantization is that implicitness becoming more explicit. So there's multiple quantizations that need to occur so that implicitness, when we use the words presence, power, knowledge, and harmony, they're ambiguous, large, it's difficult to grasp what they actually mean. But then if you run them through a process of quantization in a sense, or you realize that the presence, power, knowledge, harmony need to be quantized in order that we can see the fullness of what they mean. So, knowledge, when we think about it practically, it might be, okay, the pursuit of knowledge, it might be curiosity about different areas that we are not necessarily involved in. It might be just this thirst for understanding the why of things and what lies deeply behind everything. It might be this kind of sense that, hey, you want to be able to run an organization as knowledgeably as possible, understanding your environment as fully as possible. So knowledge, the point is that knowledge diversifies into infinite variations, all related to knowledge. There's many ways in which you can describe knowledge, but all that, you can think of is implicit in one thing when light's traveling infinitely fast. All that possibility of what knowledge means materially when we think about our existence here is implicit as one thing in that field of unity. So it requires the process of quantization to actually express what is meant by knowledge, or what's meant by presence or power or harmony. And physically, if we think about, okay, so that's conceptually, we're saying that quantization is the bringing out of the richness materially. That's what it is conceptually. But physically, how does that work? So how does the process of quantization actually, might it work in physical terms? So that's where you're bringing the play of C and H being Planck's constant. And you're saying that, or what I'm saying is that where you have, if you think about H just intuitively, if we can try and grasp this, is that it's telling us the smallest amount of space or time, if we think about what H represents here physically, which is measurable, so you've got like, many variations of that small number Planck that shows up in a whole bunch of different constants. But it's essentially telling you what's the smallest unit that's measurable. And that measurability in a sense is, to me, it's really where there's concrete enough information that can express itself in a whole so that you can recognize what that information is. If that information remains partial, and if it were to express itself, you wouldn't know what it is. So it has to reach a threshold by which it can express itself, and that is related to H physically. But if you see the play between H and C, then really what you're seeing is that where C is finite, then since it requires X amount of time to travel a unit distance or to express whatever it's trying to express, that you can relate that to this constant H. However, if you then go back to that realm where light travels infinitely fast, H is going to be zero. That H is going to be zero there because there's everything is unified, everything is known completely. And so you can see, in a sense, you're now bounded. You've got infinite speed of light, and you've got h0, and now in this material realm, you've got a finite speed of light that we know as 186,000 miles per second, and you've got a finite h that is required for particles to show up materially.
Mhm.
So the quantity of h is what's required for that concept to express itself materially as a particle. However, we can also, we've heard of like the dual nature of light, the wave particle aspect. And what I would propose is that when we actually talk about waves, we're talking about a quote unquote H that is even smaller than the H that we know physically, that doesn't allow matter to accumulate into a particle, but it then, whatever is going to be materially expressed is more spread out as a wave, but it's a different value of H in a sense. It's even smaller than H here. So you can see that trend backwards. And so, you can see where H is a finite value, there's a particle. If H is smaller than our known value here, it can express itself as a wave. If H is even smaller, it can express itself as a vast field. And if H is 0, then whatever is being expressed is infinitely available everywhere as unity. Right. So there's a scheme there where H is going from some value to 0. And as it's doing that, the way matter expresses itself, or that thing that we know as matter express itself behind this layer is more and more, or is less and less contained. It's more spread out. So it's spread out as a wave, it's spread out as a field, and it's spread out infinitely all at once when light's traveling infinitely fast.
So field, infinitely fast field,
Yeah.
wave,
Wave, and then particle.
particle.
Yeah. And again, these are mathematical conveniences, because I'm not saying that that's what reality is. I'm just saying that mathematically it works out as a convenience when you actually try and see how can unity become diversity, and then how can that thing that's contained in as infinity and unity express itself as infinite diversity materially. Then these become convenient transitions, and that to me is the basis of quantization. Quantization is a convenient transition where light can express itself more materially in a form that we recognize as different from its previous form. So that, to me, that's what quantization is. And it results in this notion of quantization where we actually recognize that things are particles, that quantum objects have shown up as particles. Of course, and where quantum physics will take you today is that there's never just a particle. It's always, there's something else. It's a way, there's infinite potential, but that's the point, is that, yes, it may show up as a particle, but the concept that's being expressed is really what the important thing is, and the particle is a convenience, just given the laws of our material realm by which it anchors itself in some sense. So.
The last thing that you said, that the particle has, but the concept is the important thing, not the particle.
Yeah.
So what, in a way, is the particle standing for something behind it?
Yes. So yes, of course. Yes.
Okay.
So that's the thing that in my perception, or in this point of view, what I would say is that everything is completely unique, even at the quantum level, so we may classify things as bosons or Higgs boson or leptons or quarks into broad categories in which all quantum particles fit. But if we were to really, really go into the depth and understand energetically what these things were, we would find that there was complete uniqueness, that by the vehicle by which it's being expressed is this thing that we recognize as something that has a property of a particular quantum particle, but there's so much of depth behind even what shows up as a quantum particle. Everything is completely unique all the time, every time, so, but we just, again, there's a generalization by which, we need to kind of rationalize, normalize, and categorize things in order to grasp what they are, so.
So this is like the snowflake at the quantum level.
Yes, I think that's a great way to say it. Yes. I mean, so the same principle, the very fact that no two things are alike here in the physical realm, I mean, why should it be any different even when we kind of go backwards into the more subtle realms? It shouldn't, right? I mean, how can it be? If something is the same in a subtle realm, then why would it be different when it's expressing itself materially? That doesn't make sense. I mean, that thread of uniqueness has to go all the way back to where light's traveling infinitely fast.
Right.
Right. So. What else?
I probably have too many questions and we don't have enough time.
Go for it.
But I'm interested in the concept of information being in light, maybe universal DNA even in light in some ways. Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure, absolutely. Mike, I'll mention one thing, and I know you'll get a kick out of this. So actually, I'm in process of. I filed a provisional patent, and I'm in the process of filing a non-provisional right now. That actually is a unique quantum computing design. So it's a design for a different kind of quantum computer that tries to get at precisely that. Is the uniqueness that exists no matter how deep we go, and even back to the quantum level. And so the whole idea of quantum computation is entirely different. Where if we kind of think about today's paradigm, what we're doing is we're regurgitating or we're using a digital mindset to try and imagine that what we could do at the quantum level, and we're using the same approach, but I'm suggesting that in fact it would be entirely different. So this comes to the notion of information and light, and back to your question, because the information in light, very simply, there's infinite information in light, but we can think about it, precisely how I had suggested before, is that we can broadly categorize, if we want to remain very simple, we can say, okay, there's 4 properties to light. We call them knowledge, presence, power, harmony. But then as we try and understand what that is, and through the process of quantization, there's a different filter, and we become aware of that richness or information and light that becomes infinite, because knowledge, presence, power, harmony mean there's infinite elements to each of these 4 sets. So already there's a vast richness that exists. And then if you think about information also in light, then the way it shows up before it expresses itself materially is that you can think about these elements from the 4 different sets combining in infinite number of ways to create infinite number of seeds. So to me, that really is what, when you talk about DNA and you talk about structure of information at the level of light, this is how I would perceive it, is that it's kind of precipitating and showing itself. I mean, how else do you grasp that infinity that potentially exists there? So you've got to have some scheme by which your mind can wrap itself around, what might potentially what you might mean by infinity. And so that's mathematically the 3-level scheme that I arrived at. But of course, it's not something that's just random, and I'll tell you why. Because this information scheme is tied to very concretely what shows up materially. So meaning, if we look at any living cell, then there are 4 and only 4 molecular plans that animate any living cell, whether it's plant, animal, or human. And we know these as nucleic acids, polysaccharides, lipids, and proteins. And if you ask, what do each of these represent? Nucleic acid represents knowledge, proteins represents the idea of presence or service, lipids represents harmony, and polysaccharides represents energy or power, right? So already that what shows up materially is these four things in a complexity that you don't recognize it. But the point being, coming back to your question on information and light, the point is that this is not a random scheme that I'm saying that knowledge, power, presence, harmony just exist, hey, and let's work with that. I'm saying that whatever happens materially is tied back to, there's no kind of randomness here. It's tied up very concretely to the subtle information that already exists in light. And the fact that it shows up materially as four categories shows that these four categories exist in light, right? And so even if you think about how matter and life kind of manifest or emerge, then you can see that with each subsequent level of matter, if we think about quantum particles as the first level, atoms as the second, and then if you think about the first concrete manifestation of life as cells, you already see that there's incredible complexity of or richness of functionality that is precipitating or emerging with each of these subsequent layers of matter and life. For example, in a human cell, there's over 30,000 different proteins, which means that the functionality in a human cell, if you just consider proteins alone, is enormous. So the amount of possibility that exists, or the amount of information that's captured in a cell, is just mind-boggling. But it all comes from this richness or information in light, and that's when you kind of take the trend back, or you go back to it, and then coming back to this notion of DNA and our focus for today, which is space-time, energy, gravity. What I also propose is that space-time, energy, gravity is actually the script or the code by which anything that shows up is written. It's written in space-time, energy, gravity terms. So if we were to penetrate into the functioning of a protein, the protein has space-time, energy, gravity components that will then define how it should act, or what it is, or what its possibility is. And that's captured by these four dimensions that are all, they need to be together in order to express wholly the explicitness that's trying to express itself, that's implicit in light. So DNA, to me, and I've written a whole book on this, the origins and possibilities of genetics, is essentially, again, we can think about what really is DNA, or what really is being programmed in a protein or in a lipid or in a nucleic acid, and it all goes back to this notion of these properties that we begin to see in light. So
that's helpful. I really like the comparison to the functions in the cell. I'd have to assume that if we looked at an individual human, there are corollaries, and probably assume that this goes up as groups of people collect together at different scales. But that I would love to talk more about sometime with you.
Yeah, exactly, Michael. So that's exactly where it goes, is because you can think about each more complex layer of life as it emerges, is emerging to, in fact, bring out that infinite richness that exists in light implicitly. So that infinite richness is materially, uses the mechanism of collectivities of people, or however you want to think about it, or nations, or a civilization, to begin to express what is potential within it, which always existed when light traveled infinitely fast.
So because I'm more visual, I really love that you talk about the wholes, the potential that are in the wholes, and how their richness is the manifestation of this vast richness in the four properties. There's this something, very lovely about thinking about that potentiality in each. And there's, worldviews and philosophies that talk about that, right? But this is concrete in a certain way. And anyway, it aligns with some very interesting ideas that civilizations have had over time.
Yeah, so I mean, this might be a good time to end, unless you know, have anything else you'd like to bring up in the next few minutes. Otherwise, we could just wrap and just have an informal conversation. So, yeah. All right.
Sounds great. This
I'm gonna
is